So, Kevin, across the years that you've been running your tests, do you see any trends, good, bad, or otherwise, across hosting companies, things that have changed quite a lot? Because what you described there, you're coming up on almost 10 years of this testing. So, you might have seen a few things and changes in the hosting industry.
I mean, the most noticeable change is speed. When I started, the internet was slower, WordPress was slower, CDNs were slower. Everything has gotten faster now. We have pages loading, in milliseconds in some of these tests. You're averaging, 20 milliseconds for some of the fastest companies and delivering that around the world in these kind of speeds, which 10 years ago is probably unimaginable. I'm not even sure WordPress could fire off a request that quickly to begin with, let alone delivered to a customer. So the speed change is very noticeable. And the quality, I haven't actually checked this, but in my gut, I feel like from when I started in those earlier tests to now, there are more companies getting the top tier marks and not struggling with these tests. Whereas before, these tests put a lot more strain on the companies. And I don't know if that's everybody just getting better or if it's a self-selection filter of the companies that do well continue to show off that they are doing well and the ones that don't stop participating. I won't discount that possibility, but it feels like more companies are delivering a better experience.
Yeah, one of the things that surprises me about your test, because to my knowledge, I don't know of any independent speed test like yours on the web. I just don't see it. I haven't seen anything like that. And I thought most hosting companies would be queuing up to participate, but on the whole, they're not, because I think there are many hundreds of hosting companies still out there, or at least offering WordPress. Do you have a theory on that?
I have many, and some are more specific than others, but yeah, there are probably thousands of companies that say they offer WordPress hosting. I think most of them don't belong in my tests, if we're being quite honest. WordPress hosting gets used as a marketing term by a lot of companies, and it just means they have a WordPress installer and you can put a WordPress site on there, which is virtually every hosting company on earth can reach that bar. The companies that are actually going out of their way to add more performance and actually giving consideration to WordPress especially is a far, far smaller subset. And in that grouping, I would say there's a pretty decent representation in the benchmarks. I would imagine the number of companies that really do WordPress is probably under 100. Mm-hmm. And so we're getting somewhere between 30 and 40 companies, I think, this past year. I forget the exact number. So that's a pretty sizable chunk.
Okay.
But there are definitely notable omissions. And like I said in your previous question, I think one of the reasons is they don't perform well. And if you don't perform well, why would you want to show up in a test where you don't look good unless you were actually going to dedicate resources and get better?
Yep.
And we do see some companies who have participated year after year, sometimes doing well, sometimes doing not. And I know a lot of those companies, if they keep coming back, somebody there tends to care about performance. And this is a way to measure it externally and try and improve it. I can imagine in larger organizations that could be difficult. Not everybody has the same interests and intentions, but if a company's participating over and over and not doing well, I actually think that's a good sign about the company and their intentions.
Sure. So we talked about where you've seen past trends like speed and general quality, Kevin, going. What about the future? At a certain point, that speed will, the improvements will be very incremental, I guess. Do you see any other future possibilities, future trends?
I mean, that's a very good question. One of the bigger trends I think we see is this more DIY or assisted DIY, as I'll call it. Um, Traditional hosts, you sign up, you click a button or two, and you have a WordPress set up. They optimize, they do everything. What we've seen over the last, I'm not sure how long it's been, 10, 15 years, has been the rise of companies like DigitalOcean, which have targeted developers and opened up things to an audience that, Amazon has been there for a while. Amazon's A, expensive, and B, can be very complicated.
Yeah.
But companies like DigitalOcean, Vulture, Linode, these cheaper VPS providers created this ecosystem of very cheap access to resources that could scale and not scale. And once you have that, the developers stepped in, the companies have stepped in and built on top of them. And so you have companies like Cloudways, which lets you deploy on many platforms. And then you have all these companies like Server Pilot and Easy Engine, many of these scripts that let you set up on these kind of infrastructure providers. And that's kind of the DIY, assisted DIY I'm talking about. That seems to be growing, and these kind of open source, some of them products, is probably a pretty big threat for eating a larger chunk of the market from the developers that might have otherwise just signed up out of simplicity's sake. So that's an interesting trend to watch. And I think that puts the onus on web hosting companies, more traditional ones, to either step up in some other aspect. And for the most part, that aspect is support. I mean, the value most hosting companies deliver is when things go wrong or when I need help, or is someone else going to be there to fix it? And how good is that experience? Yep. So that's kind of the one big trend I see.